Heavenly Father, we beseech Thee. I kneel before You as a member of this age-old craft, praying to You for guidance as I am on a journey for more light, but more especially light that has been lost, forgotten, or hidden among the ages gone by. The light that connects us with our very meaning and informs us of our purpose. Light locked deep within our past, beyond lips that no longer speak, and paths forgotten, no longer traveled. Aid me in my pursuit, Lord, for historical light.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Historical Light, an independent Masonic show focused on the historical events and aspects within Freemasonry. As always, I'm your host, Brother Alex Powers, and I want to thank you for joining us again for episode number 17. Today we're very excited to have on the show Brother James Morgan III, who is the Associate Grand Historian and Archivist for the Prince Hall jurisdiction of Masons in Washington, D.C. But before we get to that, let's start off like we always do with our friends over at MasonryToday.com to see just what happened in Masonic history today. Today in Masonic history, Arthur Edward Waite is born in 1857. Arthur Waite was an American-born British poet, writer, and occultist. He was born October 2nd, 1857 in Brooklyn, New York. His father passed away when Waite was young. His widowed mother moved them to her home country of England, where Waite was raised and educated in a small private school in North London. At the age of 13, he was sent to St. Charles College. He would leave school to become a clerk, and in his spare time would write verse. In 1874, Waite's sister, Frederica, passed away. This led Waite to begin research in psychic matters and other occult topics. He spent many hours reading in the library at the British Museum, studying various branches of esotericism. In 1891, Waite joined the Outer Order of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. He'd remain in the order until 1914, with a brief break from 1893 to 1896. His time in the order was filled with strife. The internal feuding did not end until Waite finally left the order in 1914. In the order, Waite encountered Aleister Crowley. The two are often described as foes, although that does not do justice to the nature of their relationship. Crowley referred to Waite as the villainous Earth Waite in his novel Moonchild, and in the magazine Equinox, Crowley referred to Waite as Dead Waite. Waite wrote many books. The main topics he wrote about were divination, esotericism, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, ceremonial magic, Kabbalism, and alchemy. In 1921, he wrote a new encyclopedia of Freemasonry. One of Waite's most notable achievements was that he was the co-creator of the popular and widely used Rider-Waite Tarot Desks. He also wrote the companion book, The Key to the Tarot. Waite passed away May 19th of 1942. He joined Freemasonry in 1901, joining Rooney Meady Lodge, number 2430, in Waysbury, England. It is believed that Waite was motivated to join Freemasonry because of his interest in the higher degrees, specifically the Royal Arch and later the Knights Templar, York Rite Commandery, which he did end up joining. All right, well, thank you once again to our friends over at MasonryToday.com, and keep up the great work. Now, let's jump over and pay the bills. Today's episode is brought to you in part by our sponsor, Masonic Revival. If you haven't checked them out, definitely do so today, right after the show, at MasonicRevival.com. You're going to find a great source there of Masonic apparel, bow ties, neckties, and so much more. And if you use our promo code, you can get free shipping on your entire order. So definitely take advantage of that today. And that promo code is all caps, one word, HLIGHT. I repeat that, all caps, one word, HLIGHT. Will get you free shipping on your entire order today at MasonicRevival.com. Now, this episode is also brought to you in part by viewers like you, so if you like what we do here and want to see us continue, help fund the show and replace some old equipment. As you know, we've had some issues lately with the computer that caused us to miss the last episode, so trying to replace some old equipment and get some additional equipment to bring you better quality material from outside just the studio. You can support the episodes yourself by going to our website, historicallight.com, clicking on the Support Us tab, and donating to the show safely and securely through PayPal. We definitely appreciate if you would consider that and supporting the show and our future. All right, so with that, we will jump right into today's interview. I hope you enjoy. Everybody, welcome back to Historical Light. Very pleased to have on the show tonight Brother James Morgan from the DC area on the Prince Hall side. Brother Morgan, if you don't mind, I'll hand it over to you. If you want to further introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background.
Certainly. Good evening, everyone. My name is James Morgan III. I am a past master of Corinthian Lodge number 18, which operates under the auspices of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, where the Honorable Philip David is our 85th Grand Master. I have the pleasure and honor of serving as the Worshipful Associate Grand Historian and Archivist for the Prince Hall Masons of Washington, D.C. And I also have the honor of being a co-panelist on the Prince Hall Think Tank YouTube show, which, much like what you do here, Brother Powers, at Historical Light, where we discuss a lot of Prince Hall specific history. And so, our mission, although we're doing things in different channels, our missions are aligned. So I'm just very honored and happy to be here.
Indeed. And I'm a big fan. So thank you guys so much for putting that information out there. You guys are doing a great job on that end. Now, I do want to jump in and ask you, what kind of family history, if any, do you have within Freemasonry?
Oh, man. Well, I have quite a bit of family history of Freemasonry, which I did not know about when I joined and was raised as a Master Mason in 2010. I'm also very active in the African American genealogy community. I'm a member of several genealogy societies. And in my journey to further Masonic knowledge, eventually one day I kind of got the idea of looking up my own family history and found out I was actually a 7th generation Prince Hall Mason, although I didn't know that. Yeah, although I didn't know that when I joined. So I'm one of probably very few today who's done that research, and I can actually say that I have an ancestor who was actually born into chattel slavery, but before he passed from this earth, actually became a founding member of his Masonic Lodge. Actually, that individual's name was Joseph McBride, and he was the charter secretary for Myrtle Lodge 162 PHA in Pike County, Alabama. And his lodge, by the way, still exists, which I think is kind of amazing. So, that was really. It was a big honor for me to find that out.
That's intense, and I can definitely kind of gather thoughts with you on that as far as getting into genealogy. You're much more experienced in it than I, and I've taken a lot of notes from you over time, but it is an addictive pastime, is it not?
Definitely. Oh, yeah, definitely. And then, especially when you start getting into Masonic history, because for me, I look at Masonic Lodge histories really as great windows into local history. So, for example, as I mentioned with my grandfather, Joseph McBride, the first record I found of him as a Mason was from 1911, listed, and at that time he was serving as treasurer of his lodge. Well, the funny thing about that was the junior warden at that time was named Toby Townsend. Immediately, I already knew who these individuals were because Toby Townsend was Brother McBride's son-in-law, my third great-grandfather. And by the way, at that time, I still was junior warden of my lodge. So it was like I was junior warden, and here it is. I have a record of my third great grandfather serving as junior warden with my fourth great grandfather as treasurer. I mean, that really it really bugged me out, but it also reinscribed in my heart the important obligation we have as Masons today, because Freemasonry, to me, doesn't belong to us today. It really belongs to those who are coming after us. So, yeah.
Very well said, brother. And, I can touch on that. Myself, I've been able to track back being a 5th generation Mason. There's speculation farther than that, but nothing I can hard put to paper there.
Right.
But it's very cool how it just automatically creates that unspoken bond to family before you. You've never met before, didn't have any idea they even existed, and sometimes, but all of a sudden, you're brothers and you got that true bond there. It's something pretty magical about that.
Absolutely.
Now, jumping in, you said you weren't aware of this Masonic family history before actually coming into the craft. So what is it that actually made you want to make that leap into Freemasonry and become a Mason?
To be honest with you, I was always interested in, I guess you would say, antiquarian type of information and organizations and different kind of teachings and whatnot. I became very interested in Freemasonry around 2000. I would say, well, I remember distinctly, I bought my first Masonic book in 2008. And I was interested, wasn't really necessarily trying to join, but was just trying to learn more about it. And the more I learned, the more interested I became in joining. And I was kind of aware of Prince Hall Masonry, but not really. And then what ended up happening was that I got a book, which actually I happen to have right here. I picked this book up, Black Square and Compass, 200 Years of Prince Hall Masonry by Joseph Walks. And I became very fascinated not only with what Freemasonry is in and of itself, but to learn the history of Prince Hall Masonry, which for those who may not know is the historically African-American branch of the Masonic family. For me as a, 20-something or early 20s, young black man in America, it really spoke to a very intimate place for me. To hear these stories and to learn. And I remember distinctly thinking, even as far as back then, wondering, hey, did I have any relatives that were involved in Masonry or anything? Never knowing what it was at that time. So the more I learned, the more I realized some of the men who I already looked up to in African American history were not just Masons themselves, but were very active leaders in the organization. Particularly if you read that book, you'll learn about Brother Martin Delaney, who was a big figure in my, I guess you would say, development in terms of historical studies. And so when I learned that he was a Mason and how important Masonry was to him, by the time I was done reading that chapter in that book, that's when I said, I'm going to join this organization, because that's how much I really admire Martin Delaney quite a bit.
Wonderful. And, I really don't get why today there's still so much controversy between mainstream Masonry and Prince Hall, but I'm glad to say here in the state of Kansas, both of our Grand Lodges are extremely tight-knit, and we continue to do work to keep those bonds growing, and I hope to see that continue, through the rest of the United States and around, because we're all brothers at the end of the day. Absolutely.
It's
crazy.
Yeah, and if I could say one last thing on that before you move on, just as I said, it's a history. Masonic lodges are a window into local history. To me, they are a window into family history, and I think one issue that no one, even including myself, has really truly dealt with is part of the history of Prince Hall Masonry is a history of early mixed race America. The term used to be mulatto, right? And so I think that there's a very intimate relationship, which maybe we can talk about, I guess maybe on another episode or something, of children or sons of prominent white men who were Masons, and then they come over to the Prince Hall lodges in town or somewhere else and become members. And so there's this dichotomy of, well, we're all Masons and I'm related to you, but we can't acknowledge it. There's kind of a silent relationship there, if that makes sense. So,
right.
So yeah, definitely.
Well, definitely with all the research you've done, and got to give you props for that. Your work has definitely amazed me for some time now. I don't know how you fit it all in, but you've done some pretty impressive research on an area close to me here in Kansas. So we're going to hand it over to you and let you share some of that really cool research that you found in the Masonic history within this area of Kansas.
Certainly. And actually it's a great segue, because my study of Prince Hall history in Kansas actually started as a project in genealogy.
Right.
In April of 2014, I was contacted by a young woman named Denisha Swanigan, who I credited as a contributor in the paper. And she had a letter, which was very interesting. She already knew that she was a great niece of Senator Blanche Kelso Bruce, the first full-term African-American senator in United States history, who represented Mississippi but had ties to Kansas and Missouri because of his family.
Wow.
And this letter was written on Prince Hall Masonic Lodge, Grand Lodge letterhead. At that time, the Grand Lodge, I think, was styled something, and I'm going to butcher the name, but at the time it was styled Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Missouri, Colorado, Minnesota, like it was like all these different states, right? And you know that now, today in Prince Hall Masonry, each of those states have their own Grand Lodges, but at the time they did not. The thing that was interesting about this letter was that what happened was Senator Bruce, upon being elected to Congress, actually came to Washington, D.C., gets married very quickly, and his brother, J.J. Bruce, was serving as Grand Treasurer of the Prince Hall Masons in Missouri at that time. He wrote a letter on letterhead on behalf of the family, on behalf of their mother, basically saying, hey, congratulations, but we just found out about this. Thanks for inviting us. Not.
Wow.
But basically it was just, it was really just a family letter, nothing of real Masonic value there. Just basically saying, hey, send pictures. Mom wants to hear all about her. But again, there was this letterhead, and Miss Swanigan had no idea what the heck it meant. I, being a Masonic historian, could look at it automatically and say, oh, I know what time period this is from. I have an idea of who this J.J. Bruce would have been around. I already kind of suspected that Blanche Bruce was a Mason just from knowing the circles he kind of ran with. And so that was, that was really it. We started off just trying to learn about J.J. Bruce and Senator Bruce's Masonic history. And then the more I got to know Miss Swanigan, the more I became intrigued. And the reason why I became intrigued was because Blanche and J.J. Bruce were not the only siblings that were Masons. I would find out that J.J. was a past master of Mount Olive Lodge number 15, Olive Branch Lodge number 15 in Brunswick, Missouri. And then Blanche Bruce was a member of H. McGee Alexander Lodge number 3 in St. Louis, which I believe still exists. But then there were some others there also, such as Robert, and Robert Bruce who was a member of Olive Branch also, Sandy, which was her direct ancestor. And then there was Henry, Henry Bruce. And Brother Henry C. Bruce was very interesting. The reason why he was very interesting was because Miss Swanigan actually had a newspaper clipping which talked about him being shot, and Masonic brothers coming to his aid, not to his aid medically, but to his aid in terms of them seeking revenge on the person that shot him, and that they had chased this guy down and killed him in the streets of Leavenworth, Kansas.
Wow.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
The thing that most intrigued me about this was that there was one person named in the article as a shooter. That person's name was William D. Matthews, who I already knew very well. William Matthews in Prince Hall history was a very big figure in the post-Civil War years leading up to his death in 1906 for various reasons, which we'll get into in a moment. So when I read this, I said, oh, I know who William Matthews is. I know, so that kind of, it connected in my mind. And the more that we dug into this story, the more I realized that the history that has been portrayed in Kansas Masonic history for Prince Hall Masons was not true. What we would uncover is that we would uncover a story that I believe, and in the paper which I've titled A Worthy Adversary, a history of the most worshipful King Solomon, Grand Lodge of Kansas, from 1867 to 1877. I document, and I believe I proved that this story was basically erased. It was erased by a man who actually served as Grand Master of my Grand Lodge, William H. Grimshaw. Who anybody who knows or who's really studied Prince Hall Masonic history knows that past Grand Master Grimshaw in his book, his 1903 work, The Official History of Freemasonry Among Colored People, he basically, a lot of people will tell you that he made stuff up. I don't believe that. I believe that his book was a piece of Masonic propaganda that was used to combat black Masonic organizations that were opposed to what we now know as PHA Grand Lodges, as well as to combat the abuse that Prince Hall Masons were taking from our Caucasian brothers. Okay?
Right.
To get back to Kansas. What happened was that in Grimshaw's book, he stated in so many words that the first lodge for black men in Kansas was Western Star Lodge number 1, established in the year 1865 from what's now the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio. Soon after that, 2 other lodges were formed, Euclid Lodge and Mount Olive Lodge, and then the Grand Lodge was formed, and they lived happily ever after when the Grand Lodge was formed in 1875. Please put a bookmark in your mind when I say 1875, because again, that's not true. And this is what kind of leads me to believe that this was a false, or this was purposely done, I should say. Now, what I was able to uncover was that there was actually a Grand Lodge of black men that was descended from Prince Hall and African Lodge 459, which preceded the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas, which exists today.
Wow.
I won't say the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas was birthed out of that first body. I will not go that far, but they have a common origin point. They have a common story, and it is that common story which we published, and I have it here in the most recent issue of the Philaxis magazine, where part 1 is published, and then part 2 will be coming out within the next month or two.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a very interesting story, and the best way I can sum it up, I tell people, I would always ask brothers, I say to Prince Hall brothers, I say, have you ever read a story about Prince Hall Masonry in the Wild Wild West? And most brothers will look at me and they'll say, well, no, I haven't. And I say, this is why. Because at that time, or at its height, I should say, King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas, with William Matthews as its Grand Master, and when I say at its height, I'm talking about during the Reconstruction era and post-Reconstruction era. At its height, they had lodges as far as Cheyenne, Wyoming, all the way down to Texas. Wow. This is one Masonic jurisdiction run by Grand Master William D. Matthews, who after 1878, 79, there becomes a lot of controversy around him and the National Grand Lodge, which is the main reason why I believe that this story was written out of history. Okay. So would you want me to get into the formation of the Grand Lodge?
Yeah, if you'd like to, go right ahead.
Okay, sure. So the truth of what happened, now that we've gotten the falsehood out the way, here's the truth of what happened. The truth is that William Matthews was from Maryland, actually, actually I live in Maryland now, even though I'm not from here, but I'm a Jersey boy. but he was born here. He actually spent time in Jamaica. He was born as a free man. He spent time in Jamaica as a merchant. Eventually, he becomes a grain merchant when he returns to the United States. He was based in Baltimore for a short time period. And according to an obituary that I located, he became a Mason in the city of Boston in 1856. I do not know which lodge he was a member of, but I'm pretty sure that he joined what's now the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. Pretty sure, but don't have it 100% proof. But in any case, what basically happens with him in a nutshell is that he was affiliated with a man named Daniel Reed Anthony. You may know that name Anthony because most people haven't heard of Daniel Reed Anthony, but he had a younger sister named Susan B. Anthony. I'm sure you've heard of her once or twice, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So Daniel Reed Anthony basically, for whatever reason, he invites William Matthews out to Kansas to, he basically says, come out and see how you like it. They both had abolitionist and Underground Railroad leanings. So he invites him out. At first, Matthews really did not want to go. I found that out, but he ended up coming out to Leavenworth, and he, I guess he liked it. He settled down or whatever, and immediately he becomes active in Underground Railroad activities in Leavenworth, based in his house on Shawnee Street, which I was actually just there not too long ago. And so what happens is during this early period, some kind of a way, and I'm not 100% sure on how. I imagine it was because of their Civil War affiliations and Masonic Association, whatever the case was. Some kind of a way, William Matthews becomes a member of Enterprise Lodge, which was chartered from what is now the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Indiana, and this is in 1860. This is the first Black Lodge in Kansas Masonic history that, again, most people don't know about. Between 1860 and 1867, Indiana chartered 2 more lodges, and this is how I was kind of able to figure out what happened. They chartered J.S. Hinton Lodge and Mount Moriah Lodge. And when I found that J.S. Hinton Lodge listed, I said, who the heck is J.S. Hinton? I thought it was talking about John T. Hilton, who was a Prince Hall brother from Massachusetts, but it didn't. I just kept seeing this Hinton name over and over and over again. So one day I just used my friend Google and said, let me find who J.S. Hinton is. And lo and behold, he was the first black legislator in Indiana. He was a recruiter for the Civil War for black soldiers for the 54th and 55th USCT. Wow. And he was also Grand Master of the Grand Lodge up there during this period.
Wow.
So it kind of makes sense.
Quite the resume.
Yeah, exactly. So Grandmaster Hinton, he got a lodge named after himself. How many of us, would do the same, right?
Right.
So I'm happy that he left that calling card because that helped me to establish the lineage of the Grand Lodge that would come later. Now, what happens is this, and this is where a lot of controversy kind of starts to boil over. In 1866, what's now the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri, they established two lodges in Leavenworth also, Western Star Lodge and Far West Lodge. Okay. Now you'll notice I just said Western Star, right? Grimshaw claimed that the first lodge in Kansas was also named Western Star. There's a confusion there. There are two different Western Star lodges that people have to learn how to separate in their minds, and I was able to figure this out. Okay, it's two different lodges with the same exact name. But in any case, what happens is that when Missouri establishes those two lodges in Kansas, they immediately receive a letter which claims to come from the office of the Grand Master of Indiana, which states that those lodges were illegal, they should not be there. Grand Master H. McGee Alexander, he believes it to be a forgery. He also made a statement that while he was aware that there had been a lodge in Kansas before, that lodge had not met for 3 years. So he believed that the letter was forged somehow. Many people, or I won't say many, a few people have said that they believe William Matthews to have forged this letter. I don't believe that the letter was forged. I actually believe, based on looking at CCFC reports of the time period, and for those who don't know, CCFC means Chairman for Committee of Foreign Correspondence, or where they talk about what's going on interjurisdictionally. At that time period, I found a lot of reports where people complained that Indiana really wasn't sending out reports or they didn't know what was going on. So I really believe that Indiana may not have even told Missouri or that these lodges were still going, what was happening. And we also have to factor in, this is 1866. They said that there was no lodge meeting for 3 years. Well, let's go back from 66 to 1863. What's the major event happening in 1863 in America at this time? It's the Civil War, which, by the way, William Matthews and several others who were early Masonic pioneers in Kansas, they were actually fighting. And Matthews himself was one of the organizers of the first Kansas Colored Volunteers, which later becomes the 79th USCT. So these guys were kind of busy.
Yeah, to say the least.
So whether or not they actually were holding lodge or not continuously, I don't know. Right. I would love to find out, but I don't know. But the bottom line, as far as they were concerned, that was still territory that was blocked off. But it really didn't matter because June 24th of 1867, a convention was held, and the three lodges from Indiana and the two lodges that had originated from Missouri formed the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas. And I have differing accounts of whether it was 4 lodges or all 5 or just 3. But the bottom line is, by the end of the year, these 5 original lodges were all on one accord and had established the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas with Captain Matthews as their most worshipful Grand Master. So it was kind of fascinating finding this out, because I said, wait a second, this is not the history that had been printed, So yeah, did you have any questions on that one, or?
No, that's intense. I mean, to be able to go back and actually prove people's history wrong and bring the evidence to support it. I mean, man, I'm infatuated with your work, and I know I was kind of a lucky guest and got a sneak copy of this paper before you presented it, and yeah, I could just not even put it down. You did great work, and guys, I got to tell you, Brother Morgan here is not just a Masonic historian. This guy is just a treasure trove. Like, his research is top notch. Like, reading his paper, it was good stuff. Like,
thank you. Thank you, bro. Thank you.
Yeah, I got to definitely give you props on that. Your work is impeccable, and I really appreciate for the the amount of work that you put into the craft and the honor you put in there, man. We need more guys like you. We need more historians out there, just plain and simply. So
right back at you.
Oh, thank you, bro. Thank you. So now with this, you did get a chance to actually come down here to the local area here in Kansas. Unfortunately, I missed you. I know you were crazy busy that weekend.
Yeah.
Definitely meet up with you next time. But
Absolutely.
how was your trip? I saw that when you were here, you posted you actually found one of the lodges you were talking about, and you got a picture in front of it.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, and the funny thing, and the funny thing was, I found Mount Olive Lodge -- 3, which is on the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, right?
Right.
And if anybody sees the picture, they'll see on the front door they say founded 1875, which is not true.
Right.
And we'll get into that. So what ends up happening with King Solomon Grand Lodge, they actually, they were going along, they did the normal stuff Grand Lodges do, establishing other lodges, not just in Kansas, but also in outlying areas. Like I said, eventually getting to Wyoming and Texas. What else? We found one event where they had an excursion for the black community from Leavenworth to go to Lawrence and have a picnic day, parades, you name it. They had a ceremony honoring like the 4th anniversary of the death of President Lincoln, or it was the 4th or 5th or something like that. They're basically going along pretty normal.
Right.
Then 1869 happens. What happens in 1869? I wanted to show you all this. This is actually the autobiography of Henry C. Bruce, who was, as I said earlier, was the older brother of Senator Blanche K. Bruce. It's called The New Man, 29 Years a Slave, 29 Years a Free Man. I definitely encourage you to check it out. What happens is this, and this is why I wanted to make sure I grabbed this book. Henry Bruce and his family were enslaved, and as the Civil War is raging on, he eventually escapes from slavery in Missouri into Kansas with $5 in his pocket. He uses, I think, 2 or 3 of his only $5 he had to marry his wife. That's the first thing he basically does, and he basically, just starts working and building up his life. At this time in Leavenworth, in the end and after the Civil War is over, Leavenworth had a major housing crisis with refugees from slavery, and all type of stuff is going on throughout the country, right? This is the world that Henry Bruce is walking into, and this is the world that William Matthews is kind of navigating also. These two men lived and worked right in the same neighborhood. I actually was walking around there, as you said, a few weeks ago. Henry Bruce and Matthews would have met at very important times in their lives. They were very different men, but with common, I think, goals of uplifting their community. As I said, Matthews was born free, Henry Bruce born to slavery. Well, what Matthews does is he utilizes the Masonic fraternity as a means of helping to uplift other black men and of uniting them into a common band of friends and brothers, right? We've heard this before. What he does as members are joining is he eventually, in his own words, he states that although these guys were getting degrees and stuff, that they were so uneducated about how the Masonic lodges were supposed to work that even the worshipful masters, he found them not proficient. So what he had to do was he actually hosted lodges of instruction for about like 6 months, and mandatory. Everybody has to be there. These lodges of instruction would not have just been in Masonic ritual. Evidence to me that we have found shows that he's probably teaching basic literacy as well, basic accounting, basic, these are life skills that even in his book, Henry Bruce said he didn't have. One of the things that he talks about when he became newly freed was he said he never had to actually think about feeding himself before as a slave because his master always took care of that. He never had to think about buying clothes or dealing with money because his master handled that. So these men are coming out of a very, very traumatic experience, okay?
Right.
So what happens, long story short, with Henry Bruce, though, is that some kind of a way he ends up most likely becoming worshipful master of one of the lodges there in King Solomon Grand Lodge. He's actually appointed as Grand Lecturer for the entire state. And believe it or not, one of his brother-in-law by the name of Emmanuel Dillard, we'll come back to him in a second, Emmanuel Dillard also serves as Grand Treasurer. Okay, so we'll put that right there. Now, there was another gentleman who was not a Mason in Kansas and Leavenworth at this time by the name of Allen Pinks, also known as George Thompson or George Thomas, but his real name was Allen Pinks. Pinks was a complicated individual. He was of mixed race heritage, but he had worked, prior to the war, he had worked with slave catchers and slave traders. He, during the war, also worked with Quantrell's raiders and was active at the raid, the Lawrence raid, which I'm sure you're familiar with. If you're not, if your viewers aren't familiar with, I definitely suggest you just check it out on your own time. This massacre that occurred in the city of Lawrence, Kansas. So you have a man of mixed race heritage, a black man who had sided basically with the Confederacy for whatever reason, and now the war is over. There's a lot of tension surrounding this man, particularly with William Matthews and others in the black community. What eventually happens is, well, and actually I found this, what I'm about to say, I found this out after we finished the paper. We know that Pinks had several run-ins with William Matthews and others in the community. He actually set fire to, or attempted to set fire to Matthews' business as well as to Henry Bruce's business for whatever reason. And what he didn't realize was that Henry Bruce was actually there in the building. Wow. I didn't put this in the paper because I didn't know it at the time, but Brother Bruce was in the building, and he escaped unharmed, don't get me wrong, but he saw Pinks with his own eyes do this, okay? Also in Henry Bruce's life, he had some financial issues or disagreements with his brother-in-law, Emmanuel Dillard, who was even though he was a Mason, Brother Dillard was on the rougher side of life, if that makes sense. And again, this is the Wild West we're talking about, okay? One newspaper account said that Dillard was the proprietor of the notorious Negro Saloon. No, I'm going to say it again, the notorious Negro Saloon. Whatever that means, right? So, anyway, in April of 1869, as Brother Bruce is returning home, he's actually shot twice in the chest, if I recall correctly. Nearly dies, but does not die. And this was the story that Miss Swanigan had told me all those years ago in 2014, or that she had a clipping of, but didn't know the full context, right? So now we find out that Brother Bruce has been shot by Alan Pinks, and Pinks is arrested. He's ID'd by a friend of his, Brother Bruce's, Henry Du Bois, and he's arrested and charged. He was given $2,000 bail. He could not make bail, and so the judge, remands him to custody of the sheriff. As he's being escorted from the Leavenworth courthouse back to his holding cell, William Matthews and about between 10 to 15 other individuals ride up on horseback in the middle of broad daylight in the city of Leavenworth, and they shoot him, and he dies from his wounds a few hours later.
Wow.
In broad daylight. And the newspaper accounts not only identify who the individuals who were there and who's arrested, but they clearly state that they believe that this was the work of the Negro Masonic Order at work at that time in that area. And they actually refer to Captain Matthews as the highest muckamuck among the Negro Masons, right? So I always laugh when I think about that muckamuck. But in any case, Matthews is arrested on a coroner's warrant. Several other individuals, Lafayette Collins, Eli Symington, several other individuals are arrested. We have been able to identify most of the individuals who were arrested as members of King Solomon Grand Lodge from other records. So it's clear that this is some retribution that's going on here. Brother Bruce does recover, and we spent a good portion of the research trying to find out what happened to these individuals that were arrested. And what we were able to find was that they were all eventually acquitted, or the prosecutor refused to prosecute for various reasons. The individual we have the most information on, his name was Brother Jackson Cunningham. Notice I said brother there. Brother Cunningham's jury trial, or his jury deliberated, I should say, for 25 hours. And eventually they said that they could not convict him because witness testimony had changed. So we don't know, but I do wonder, were the brothers engaging in witness intimidation or other type of things? I mean, this is a very Masonic story, right? This sounds just like how Masons should act, right? So that was the thing. But long story short, Jack Cunningham is acquitted. William Matthews actually escorts him. The trials had been moved from Leavenworth to Lawrence. So William Matthews escorts him from Lawrence back to Leavenworth, and he's received as a hero. They're received as heroes by the black community in Leavenworth, and there's a big party thrown for them. When I got done researching this, my jaw dropped. I could not believe that this was Masonic history, but it was. And so what basically happens after that is kind of why I think the King Solomon Grand Lodge runs into some further trouble. So yeah, did you have any questions, or should I just keep going?
Keep going. I'm
okay,
soaking it up here.
No problem. No problem. I do want to read. This is my favorite. My favorite part. William Matthews himself actually talked about this event in his Grand Master's address in 1869. He actually stated, while the craft were moving forward, working in peace and harmony and brotherly love, they met with a more serious attack, which caused great confusion in the craft, as it once did in ancient times at the building of King Solomon's temple. Excuse me. Brethren of the mystic tie, our peace has been disturbed by 2 or 3 ruffians who conspired together to take the life of our grand lecturer, Brother H.C. Bruce, and on the night of April 17th, 1869, one of the ruffians, the notorious false-hearted kidnapping and Lawrence raider, Alan Pinks, at low 12 o'clock, hid himself at the west gate of our grand lecturer's residence and attempted to take his life by shooting him through the body with a musket ball. Then, like a cowardly ruffian, tried to make his escape by way of the east, but his sins found him out and have overtaken him, and he is now receiving his just reward for the betrayal of the men of the colored men, women, and children that he has kidnapped into slavery. Also, the part that he took with Quantrell in burning and sacking the city of Lawrence, Kansas. The other ruffian, I will not call his name at present, but he is well known to the citizens of Leavenworth and walks the streets daily with the vengeance of an all-seeing eye watching his footsteps, while his sins rise up before him and stare him as black as the ink that falls from the damned angel's pen. And if justice does not overtake him in this world, he will receive it in another. Doesn't that just sound? Doesn't that sound like a Grandmaster's address that you'd hear every year? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, it sounded to me when I read this, I was like, wow, this sounds like more like a gangster rap song than a Grandmaster's address. But this is the world that these men are living in. I'll draw your attention to the fact that towards the end of that piece that I just read, he mentioned that there was another individual. Evidence shows that the other individual that he was talking about was Emmanuel Dillard, the Grand Treasurer, who was, as I said, Henry Bruce's brother-in-law. What we found was that he and Bruce and Dillard had a financial dispute, and later on, Dillard is actually arrested on suspicion of having hired Pinks to shoot his brother-in-law. So, I mean, that makes sense, right? That sounds like what any American would do. You know, if your brother-in-law owes you money, you hire a hitman and you kill him, right?
Right.
So that's what we were able to find on that note. And believe it or not, Emmanuel Dillard mysteriously died the following year in 1870, early 1870. We don't exactly know who killed, see there, I'm about to say something. We don't know exactly how he died, but we know he died. I'm suspicious of something, but we'll leave it there.
Right.
In any case, King Solomon Grand Lodge kind of moved on from this chaotic episode, and but national Masonic politics would come into play at this point. Many people are not aware that in 1847, Prince Hall Masonry began an organization called the National Grand Lodge, also known as the National Compact, which was an organization basically that was created to govern the subordinate Grand Lodges in each state. And this kind of was going along okay. I mean, there was always controversy surrounding this practice, but that was established. Over time, Grand Lodges started saying, hey, wait a second, this is not a regular Masonic practice. We can get into the jurisprudence side of it. But, you know, of course, Mackey's jurisprudence is coming out and whatnot, and they're saying, hey, Grand Lodges are supposed to be sovereign unto themselves. And this becomes a very, very, very heated debate among Black Masons at this time, some of whom are saying, hey, no, we need the National Grand Lodge, which William Matthews was very much on the extreme of that side. There are others who are saying, no, we need to let it go. And in 1868, the jurisdiction of Ohio outright leaves the National Grand Lodge entirely. My Grand Lodge in 1871, we left. Several other jurisdictions ended up leaving that organization and basically saying, no, we are independent. We're not dealing with the National Compact anymore. What happens is King Solomon Grand Lodge, as I said earlier, was birthed from the jurisdiction of Indiana. However, Indiana itself Masonically came from Ohio, and many of the brothers who had joined King Solomon Grand Lodge, the more experienced ones, were originally made in some way, shape, or form under the Prince Hall banner of Ohio. Okay, so psychologically, I believe that this had an effect on them in saying, wait, if our mother jurisdiction is leaving, we should too.
Right.
William Matthews was opposed to this. However, what ends up happening is that an individual named Charles H. Langston, the older brother of Senator John Mercer Langston, also a Mason, And Charles H. Langston is also the grandfather of poet Langston Hughes, by the way. Charles H. Langston ends up coming into Leavenworth in Kansas and in Missouri, and the way Missouri says it, they say he was preaching against the National Grand Lodge. And although he starts off small, eventually he's able to get people to follow him and get them to say, hey, we need to leave the National Grand Lodge alone, and whatever William Matthews wants to do, that's fine. He can stay over there, but we're leaving. And so in 1873, he actually was able to receive a charter along with another individual who I have not talked about, David Gillette, and they established a second Western Star Lodge, okay, at that time known as Western Star 34, under the jurisdiction of Ohio. So now you have King Solomon Grand Lodge on one side, and then you have this one lodge established in 1873, not 1865, okay, which is set up. Of course, William Matthews is a fit, and slowly but surely, people start to see things Langston and Let's way. David Lett, mind you, at one time had been a member of King Solomon Grand Lodge and had a lodge named after him under that jurisdiction early on. On January 1st of 1876, not 75, the jurisdiction of Ohio actually grants 2 more charters to establish lodges in Kansas. And March 7th to March 9th of 1876, those 3 lodges come together to form what is now known as the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas. So you have, again, 2 different Grand Lodges, but with a common origin point.
Right.
And so I kind of ended the paper there. I did talk a little bit about some of Captain Matthews' other exploits, particularly in Texas. The Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas is very unique in that it is, although Matthews, believe it or not, his Grand Lodge actually planted lodges that helped form the jurisdiction of like Arkansas, Colorado, other places, right? The Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas, I focus on them for one particular reason. All of those original lodges that formed the jurisdiction of Texas for Prince Hall Masons, all of those lodges originated from King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas.
Wow.
It's the only jurisdiction, as far as I know, at least at this point, where that is the case.
That's intense stuff.
Okay.
Now, have you had the chance to discuss this with the current Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas? And if so, what's their take on it? Do you have any idea?
Yes, actually, I have. I did have a brief discussion. I got the chance to meet the Grand Secretary and the current Grand Master of Prince Hall in Kansas, and the Grand Master had told me that he was aware of some of the events that I talked about, such as the shooting and whatnot. And they had a brother out there who had done a presentation on it or something like that, but that they didn't know all the details. No one had put the whole narrative together in full package the way that I had done. I would say he was receptive. I did send them a copy of the PDF of the paper, and I assume that he's a member of the Flaxus Society and that he would have received the magazine. I don't know for a fact, but they are aware, and they were pretty receptive. I didn't get like any critical response back or anything like that, but they were pretty much aware in general. They were aware that something had happened before them, but they weren't aware of all the details.
Hey, I mean, as Masonic historians, we know one thing's true. The history that we're given is not always 100% correct. I mean, I can tell you this right now. My lodge has our 150 year anniversary coming up next year, so they're wanting me to write the updated history book. So I was hoping to take, they wrote a book at the 100-year anniversary, hoping to take from that, fill in the gap up to now. Well, as I'm reading the 100-year anniversary book, talking about from day one up, and I'm comparing it to the actual the minute books. Mm-hmm. It's more like a fiction story. I don't know if the original books were lost during the time that this was written, and it was more off just the minds of members. But the point is that it was an official book that was in the local museum and library and everything, and people have taken for fact. And we look back and we can now prove that no, this indeed a lot of this stuff was not fact. So the work that you've done here is crucial to paint the true history, because as historians we're trying to keep our brothers alive and be our brothers' keepers in those way, but the real story has to be told. So brushing the dust off and bringing the truth to light, it's a huge responsibility, man, and hands down to you for the work that you've done here.
Thank you, and I'm gonna add something else too, because one thing that happens in Masonic writing is that once you put the final dot and you hit send and send it to your publisher or whatever you're doing with it, you're always gonna find stuff that happens afterwards. And one thing that I want to stress, particularly because you're a member of the Grand Lodge of Kansas, was it AF? And you guys are AF and AM?
Correct.
Am I correct?
Correct.
Right. One thing I want to point out is that I didn't mention, and I didn't know when I was writing the paper, was that I found out later that, remember I mentioned Daniel Reed Anthony and how he had helped William Matthews and whatnot? I learned that he was actually a member of King Solomon Lodge number 10 under your jurisdiction. So
really?
Very early, yes. So very early on, we see this kind of connection, and I was very happy to see that today that King Solomon Lodge number 10 and Mount Olive Lodge number 3, which was under the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of today, those lodges actually meet in the same building today. So it was kind of nostalgic for me to kind of see those jurisdictions or those lodges come together in that way, because they do have a shared history. And maybe, since you're a member of that jurisdiction, maybe you'd be interested in researching Daniel Reed Anthony a little bit more. But definitely, I think it's very important that we tell these stories. Again, Henry Bruce with his book. The thing that was so fascinating about all this Masonic stuff for his family was that he mentioned nothing about Freemasonry in his book at all. And mind you, as I said, he actually served, to give you some particulars on him, he served as Grand Lecturer, Grand Senior Deacon, and Grand Treasurer, if I recall correctly, of the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas. When the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas is formed, he is elected as their first Right Worshipful Senior Grand Warden, and then later on he becomes Most Worshipful Grand Master of that jurisdiction, of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas. And again, he mentions none of this in his autobiography. Okay, which kind of shows me the veneration that he had for Freemasonry on the one hand, but it also, in my mind, may indicate that, hey, some of those lesser things that occurred with the shooting and stuff, let's leave that in the past. Let's not shine a negative light on Freemasonry. But again, for me, I also look at it as a sociologist as well and say, well, let's look at the political and social implications of all this. Is it possible that the reason why William Matthews and those brothers kind of took justice in their own hands, is it possible that they didn't have faith in the legal system because of other things that were happening on the racial, in race relations at that time? Is it possible that these men felt that Alan Pink said this was the final straw? This is the straw that's broken the camel's back. Is it possible? There's many other ways we can go with this, but the bottom line is we see that Freemasonry and Masonic lodges are a unit of organization among men, even in very rough times. And I think that's one of the important lessons we can learn from King Solomon Grand Lodge's history.
Very much indeed. Well, brother, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show tonight and share this great history with us. Don't quote me exactly, but I was reading a quote online the other day that said basically the only thing more harmful than a lie is a half-truth. And the work you've done here, brother, is to go farther and deeper in there to uncover the entire truth. So very much want to commend you for the work you've done. Thank you again for coming on the show. And before we head out, I want to definitely hand it back over to you if you want to give any shout-outs for your show and everything else, and how people can get a hold of you for your research.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Well, people can always email me. My email address is jrmorgan919@aol.com. Feel free to email me. As far as our show, the Prince Hall Think Tank, we do air the last Sunday of every month. We actually have not put a flyer out for this month, so I apologize for that. But we do have, I think we're on like 25 or 26 episodes. We've covered a variety of topics, because what happens is in a lot of non-Prince Hall forums, Prince Hall Masonry is just roped into this one topic of Prince Hall Masonry. And what we decided to do was we wanted to go deeper and use the technology that we use today to tell our story. So we've highlighted Prince Hall Masonry in different states, such as Florida. We have an episode, which I think you would like, called Being a Young Man in an Old Man's Fraternity. We've done episodes on the National Grand Lodge, as well as Prince Hall connection with Black church history, and all type of stuff. So definitely check us out, and we're out here. So it's always a pleasure to be here and talk with you, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll have those links available in the comments below and on the website and Facebook as well. So definitely encourage you guys to check out the Prince Hall Think Tank. Check out Brother Morgan for more of his research. And again, brother, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, sir. Travel light.
Thank you again to Brother Morgan for coming on the show today. It was great to sit down and have that chat with you, and for you to come on and share that unique research on that historical light was very much appreciated. So thank you so much, brother. Now, before we wrap the show up completely today, I do got one thank you to send out. We recently featured on the episode a picture of Brother Mark and Bill that came down from Nebraska to support me when I was doing my speaking engagement up at the Midwest conferences. Now, as some of you know, a little closer to me, my uncle recently passed away. It was kind of a sudden thing, really caught the family off guard. Caught me off guard even more. Just a few days after that, I got a letter in the mail from Brother Mark and all the brothers at his lodge and visiting brethren sent me down this card, basically sending condolences. And it's signed by everyone that was in attendance. We have members there from Lodge 297, 300, 229, 54. I mean, there's just a ton of names there. It's very heartfelt. Wasn't expecting it, but man, that's brotherhood right there. So I couldn't go on without making sure I sent out a proper thank you. So thank you to all of you brothers that took the time out to make my day just a little bit better. Really means a lot. So thank you, brothers. With that, I will say please join us over at the Facebook group. And if you guys aren't aware of that, that is the Historical Light Masonic Research Group on Facebook. So if you're not a member there, search it today, click join, and we'll get you in. We have some great historical topics going on a daily basis. So become part of the communication there, part of the conversation, and join today. So we will see you over there until next time when we continue our quest for historical light. Have a great day.